The New York Times has obtained more than 1,000 hacked European diplomatic cables. Those cables reveal the international community's serious concerns about President Trump, Russia, Iran, and more. Let's discuss with the reporter who broke the story, national security correspondent for the New York Times and CNN political and national security analyst, David Sanger. David, good to have you with us as always. Give us a sense as we look at these. James Clapper was with us a little bit earlier, and he said this certainly doesn't rise to the level of WikiLeaks in terms of the information that is now out here. But still, it's significant that somebody thought it important enough to steal it, post it somewhere to be found, and then have those folks share it with you.
Well, Erica, I think that's right. I think General Clapper is correct. This is not on the scale of WikiLeaks, which was 250,000 U.S. cables. And frankly, Americans cared more about those cables because they were American in origin, and I think did reveal a bit more. In this case, the hackers who followed all the patterns of a Chinese People's Liberation Army group, I don't think intended for any of these to become public. They did a sort of traditional phishing campaign against the European Union. They got in through Cyprus, a small and less well-defended member of the EU, and then used that access to get all of the documents that, or appear to have gotten all of the documents that are exchanged daily among European diplomats through the EU's main network. In doing so, they briefly passed through some public sites on their way up to the cloud, and it was there that a company called Area 1 found them and turned about 1,000 of them over, a little more than 1,000 of them over to us. What they reveal, as you suggest, is that the diplomats get assurances from the National Security Council that President Trump didn't mean exactly what he said when he spoke with Vladimir Putin at that famous Helsinki press conference. They worry that the Russians have already put nuclear weapons into Crimea. They are concerned that Iran will use the excuse of the U.S. coming out of the nuclear deal to restart their nuclear program.
They also, too, were looking at even just a cable that refers to a July meeting with EU officials and Xi Jinping talking about U.S. demands, both U.S., what we're hearing from the U.S. and U.S. demands are inconsistent. When that's the message that's going out, which isn't shocking, perhaps, to a lot of people who've been following the headlines, obviously, but does having this out there do any damage to relationships with these countries?
You know, at this point, given the state of relations between the European Union and the United States, I don't think so. The cable you refer to, though, Eric, I think was one of the most interesting. It was a private meeting between Xi Jinping, the president of China, and the Europeans in Beijing. It was an EU-China summit in which President Xi basically says the Americans never live up to their word. President Trump is bullying them. But then he goes into this fascinating long reverie about how China for 100 or 200 years has bent to larger powers, and in this case now feels strong enough that it doesn't plan to go do it again. And what's interesting is that the president views this entire thing transactionally, and Xi views it as part of a long historical continuum in which the tide has turned and China is going to make sure that it doesn't get run over again.
Certainly sets it up there, doesn't it? As we talk about all of this, and even just putting into context, as you did off the top, these cables and this communication versus some of the other things that have been hacked and then leaked, it still begs the question of what's the conversation like at the New York Times when Area 1 comes to you and say, we have 1,000 cables that we found that someone hacked. We want you to have them. We think you should publish them. How is that decision made? Because there's still people at home who are going to say, why should we see these?
No, it's a very good question, and we debated this at some length. And here was the reasoning. First of all, these were posted in an open site. It's not as if we got them through a hacking process, or that Area 1 did as well. That, you know, the Chinese in moving them, or whoever the hackers were, though they certainly appear to be China-based, did that. Secondly, there were no big national secrets here. There were no nuclear codes. These were at the restricted level and confidential level. They were not top secret documents. And thirdly, as we looked at it, they sort of gave a backstory, one that you would frequently get in background conversations with European officials and others, to their interchanges with the president, with the Chinese, with the Iranians. And it just sort of confirmed how they're talking to each other on it. There were no great privacy revelations here, Erica. These didn't get into personally private data in any way. They were the kind of discussions you would get in a background, candid conversation if you sat down with a European official.
They also, which I know you pointed out, and which James Clapper also did point out as well this morning, they also pinpoint the fact that people have been concerned about the communication systems within the EU for some time, and there's question about what this could lead to in terms of changes. David, we're out of time, but
Absolutely.
always appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.